This is the November 2024 Q&A on moving to France. My name is Allison Grant Lounes. I am the owner of Your Transformation, a relocation agency that helps people get the right visa and do the French admin to follow their dream of moving to France. I run the Americans in France Facebook group, and I'm the author of Foolproof French Visas, which is now in its 5th edition. This is the 2024-2025 edition that was released at the beginning of October. As you can see, we are celebrating Notre Dame is going to be opening back up to the public on December 8th after more than 5 years of being closed. And so that was what I wanted to celebrate on this year's Foolproof French Visas cover. Now, there was somebody who asked in the questions about which edition to purchase if they're not moving until 2027, 2028. The plan is to release it approximately every year to year and a half, depending a little bit on any immigration developments that come up. We waited until after the 2024 immigration law that was implemented in January. The texts were published in January of this year. We waited for that to be a little bit clearer before we started working on this edition. I was hoping it would be valid until 2026. And some deputies are already talking about doing a new immigration law with our new Prime Minister and Minister of the Interior, who are not super pro-immigration, with some of the mentions and the articles that were rejected by the Constitutional Council from the previous law. So we will see how things develop. Most of the measures that were rejected wouldn't actually impact the things that are contained in foolproof French visas. They're more about being able to expel people who arrived in France as minors and are delinquents and commit crimes, and can we deport them and their family members, and can we require the spouses of French citizens to have certain financial resources or private health coverage or things like that. So a lot of those things would not necessarily impact the people who are the target audience of foolproof French visas. So we'll see what happens. A lot of the changes that we cover in the book are very gradual, and they come from observations in the field, like, oh, all of these prefectures started asking for the birth certificate for a visitor visa renewal, even though it's not a required document that you have a space to upload. Or they ask for this, but they're really looking for that. And so as we see what the reality is with people submitting visa applications and renewals, we can see the trends and comment on those more than any specific legislative changes. My plan is to not consider a new edition until 2026. Again, this is the 5th edition in 6 years. The first one was released in September 2019. We're averaging about one every 1 year and 3 months, depending a little bit on how things are evolving. I'm going to go ahead and give you the link in the chat. If you haven't already gotten your copy of Foolproof French Visas, you can get it here. And let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Makalia, how do you set up a bank account once in France, and how long does that take as a U.S. citizen studying in France? First of all, for a U.S. citizen arriving in France with a visa, you are more than likely going to have to physically go to a brick and mortar bank. So there's all kinds of online banks, but pretty much all of them are going to want you to have a physical plastic carte de séjour, which you're not going to have during your first year. I really want to insist on this point. It is absolutely essential that you open a French bank account as soon as you can. Typically, the documents that are going to be required, aside from your visa, are things like proof of address, and a lot of times they want to see do you have an account in the States that you can use to fund your French bank account and so on. But you need to have a French bank account because more and more the prefecture is coming back and they're asking people for bank statements in French showing the required funds for the visa in euros on that account. People who come to France who start getting everything set up and never open a bank account because they're transferring money from the US, they're using a Wise account, they're using a currency transfer account, but never holding the money in that account in France, they're having problems renewing, and they're being asked to provide certified translations of bank statements. Obviously, if you have to get 3, 6, 12 months of US bank statements that are 5 to 10 pages each translated into French, that's going to cost a small fortune. And so you don't want to be doing that. So that's one of the things that you definitely have to do Opening a bank account in France is not super quick, but it shouldn't take more than a couple weeks. We work with AXA. I'm going to go ahead and give you our referral and partnership form in the chat as well. So we work with certain companies with our clients. We refer people to them all the time. They are trusted professionals who work with American and British clients, especially, or all English speaking clients in France. Sometimes we get commissions for some things, sometimes we don't. It really depends on the service. That's not why we're doing this. It's really because one of my goals is to make sure that people who are moving to France are set up for administrative success for the long term, and making sure that you understand the requirements of things like getting the proper insurance, getting a bank account set up, getting your car insurance, if you getting your license exchanged, all of those things. We want to make sure that you are properly administratively set up so that if you want to be in France long term, you maintain that option. And the way to do that is to have the right paperwork. So we've developed a network of people that we work with for various things like housing, banking, currency, taxes, etc. And if you want our referrals, we're happy to send them along through the referral form. Again, sometimes we get a commission, sometimes we don't, but that's not why we're setting up these relationships. Kevin, there's a lot of confusion around accommodation requirements for the long-stay visitor visa application. There isn't if you read foolproof French visas and not Facebook groups on the internet. Is an Airbnb for a few months okay, or do you need a full 12-month long-term rental agreement? So we cover this in foolproof French visas. You need to have a temporary address where you're going to stay when you're arriving in France. What we recommend to our clients is 4 to 6 weeks in an Airbnb or similar short-term rental. Use those 4 to 6 weeks to find housing as soon as you can that is a long-term lease where you can get mail and you have a primary residence lease. That is something that can be complicated to get in the first year. Again, we work with real estate agents who can help foreigners find leases and secure a primary residence lease because it's really important to get into a long-term address. If you are staying in temporary accommodations for a long period of time, you're going to have trouble validating your visa. You're going to have to change your address every time you move. You're going to have potentially trouble getting mail and getting the appropriate bills in your name that you need to do various admin things. And so you really want to spend that time when you first arrive looking for long-term housing so that you can do all of the other admin things that are required. Rosie, I've heard that Airbnb is not sufficient as your fixed address when you apply for your visa. You have heard incorrectly. You have heard wrong. Like I said, you do need to spend that first 4 to 6 weeks really hitting the ground running, knowing where you want to look and securing a long-term lease as soon as possible. You can always move, although there are certain times of year where it's not ideal. We just had clients who moved in the middle of their visa they moved in the middle of their visa renewal. So one of them, we submitted the application. The other one has to have an appointment in the prefecture. We made the appointment and then they moved in between to a different department. And so that's kind of annoying and not ideal. I mean, I don't blame them. They can do what they want and we're handling it. But that's not the best time to move because then you have to travel back and forth. And when do I want to change my address and which prefecture is the best one to go to? And all of that kind of stuff can complicate the situation. So yeah, you want to minimize moving until you get everything set up. Sibylline, what kind of paperwork should I already prepare besides passports and photos? Okay, so we give our clients a checklist, but you want passports. You're going to need, it depends too on what type of visa. So the administrative documents that I recommend bringing: birth certificate, marriage certificate, or divorce certificates. Like if you've had any name changes, especially, you want to have the legal paperwork to back that up. If you're applying for work visas, you're going to want a CV, you're going to want previous business licenses if you're setting up a company in France, things related to previous work experience. Bank statements are always a requirement for any visa type. If you have children, you're going to need your children's birth certificates, your children's school enrollment forms, vaccination record, things like that. If you want to exchange your driver's license, you're going to need a driving record, but you don't want to order that until you already are in France because it has to be less than 3 months old at the time you submit it. So if you request the document before you leave for France, it's going to be too old by the time you want to exchange your license. So that you're going to do online after you get to France. After settling down in France for a year, am I able to travel to another country? You can travel as soon as you arrive in France. You're not like a prisoner in France. You can travel freely throughout France to other countries, etc. In the Schengen area, you'll still be limited to 90 out of 180 days in other Schengen countries. If you need to apply for a visa to go to another country, I can't think off the top of my head a country that requires a visa just to travel as a tourist. Algeria. I went to Algeria and needed a visa. You can apply for a visa to that third country from France to take a trip. You're not a prisoner. However, like I said, you really need to focus on getting housing when you first arrive that is long-term where you can receive mail. And two, you need to, there's a lot of admin to do during the first year. Moving to France, I think the title of one of my emails from a couple weeks ago was moving to France is like a full-time job. And there's really a lot of admin that you need to do to set up in the first year. And this is even if we're helping you, even if you're working with us, there's still things that you have to do. And there's also, if you have to do Opie visits and language classes, especially if you have a work visa, if you're the spouse of a French citizen, if you are a profession libérale, and you have a 1-year visa that is not a talent passport type, you have to do an Opie medical visit, 4 integration days where you're going to learn about France and how France works. You're going to have to take a French language test, and depending on how you do on the language test, you might be assigned a certain number of French language classes. So it's a really important priority that, one, you're available to go to these visits when they invite you because you do not schedule them. They tell you when to come. And two, you really want to prioritize them because you need to finish them all in order to get a multi-year card at renewal. So if you do not finish them, even if you've met all of the other criteria for your visa renewal, you might only get a 1-year card instead of a 2, 3, 4-year card at your first renewal, which isn't ideal. So make plans to travel, absolutely, but be aware that there's a lot of stuff to do in the first year and that it's not going to be vacation. If you're on a visitor visa, you only have to do the Opie medical visit. If you're on a temporary stay visa, there's no visit. So that frees up your schedule a little bit. Valerie, I would like to know about scholarships to study law at a public university. I heard about some like Sorbonne. You're going to have to look at Campus France to see what types of scholarships they offer. Scholarships are fairly limited, but that would be the place to look. I don't know about that really off the top of my head. I would like to know, if I go to study there, how can I find work that will help me with the bills and basic things to live? So if you're applying for a student visa, the primary purpose of your stay has to be your studies, and you need to demonstrate that you can support yourself with 615 euros per month minimum in cash resources or a financial guarantee from a family member. If you don't have that, you cannot put on your visa application that you're going to look for work and work part-time. That is pretty much an automatic visa rejection. Yeah, so make sure that you're going to be able to meet that financial minimum yourself or have a family member who can sponsor you. And then when you go to renew your visa, you either have to show that cash amount in the bank, or if you have a financial guarantee for students, they are now asking for your French bank statement to show regular transfers of at least 615 euros per month into your French account. So when I was a student about 15 years ago, I had a financial guarantee from my parents, but they never actually transferred the money. Like, I had some savings and I was a language assistant and I worked some small jobs here and there because you can work part-time on your student visa after you arrive, but they never actually transferred me the money. And I think that wouldn't work today. I think now if you want a financial guarantee, if you want to use a financial guarantee, you have to show that that person, that family member is actually supporting you. If I only have a copy of my birth certificate and cannot get the original, will I have problems getting my healthcare card? So it's not the original birth certificate from when you were born that you need in order to sign up for the healthcare system. You need to have a long form birth certificate that you can request from your state or your state, province, country, etc. They should be able to issue another document, which is an up-to-date document that shows records. And in fact, In many cases for French admin, they will want a recent copy of the document. I applied for French naturalization and they asked me for a document less than 5 years old. There was nothing, when I uploaded it, I had uploaded one from when I got married, which was about a dozen years ago, 13 years ago. And it didn't say how old or how recent it had to be. So I just uploaded that one and then they came back and said, no, we want one less than 5 years old. Eric, do you have any suggestions for French cities or towns that you could comfortably live in without a personal car? Yeah, there are lots. Any major French city is going to have a great public transportation system. So anywhere around Paris, anywhere, I'm looking up at my map of France above my desk. Lyon is great. Montpellier, Nice, Rennes, Nantes, Bordeaux, Toulouse. Those cities are all relatively easily accessible in TGV, so you can travel to other major cities. And it's hard to go across France. It's hard to go from Bordeaux to Lyon, for example. So you have to pick a side. But they all have fairly decent either tram systems or metro systems, and there's buses everywhere. I live just outside of Paris. I actually didn't have a car until the spring of this year. It hasn't been a hardship at all. Although now I have a car and it's in the shop and I'm annoyed. Milton, family of 3 moving to France by the end of July. There's a requirement that I get a letter from a French school certifying that my son has an available spot. How do we fill this requirement if we don't live in France? We would like our son to go to public school. Okay, so this is one of the things that we handle for a lot of our clients, and it is a little bit tricky because not all towns are super enthusiastic about doing this. Typically, what you want to do is you're going to pick the town where you plan to relocate and reserve an Airbnb, reserve your temporary address, etc. And then you're going to do a pre-enrollment in the local public school based on that temporary address. Now, when your child is maternelle or elementary age, so under about 11, this is going to be fairly straightforward and you're going to do it through the town hall. Now, the important thing is to start the process. Sometimes they won't give you a formal certificate of pre-enrollment, which is what the consulate asks for, but they will send you an email saying like, we've received your documents and understand your request. Please come in when you arrive in France with your visa to finalize the school enrollment. And that usually is fine. If your child is middle or high school age, it's going to be a similar process, except that you have to contact the school directly based on the area where you're going to be living. Now, here's the catch. A lot of times, if you're looking for a temporary rental and then you're looking for a long-term lease when you arrive in France, often I recommend don't actually have your child start school the minute you arrive in France because you want to find that housing first so they're not potentially changing schools, right? It's going to be already a little bit traumatic, probably, or a challenge in any case. It's difficult for a child to start going to school in a different country in a different language. And so you don't want to compound that by having them start in one school and then moving them to another school. So I would just say once you arrive, wait until you have a long-term address before you finalize the school enrollment based on the place where you're going to stay living. Sherry, I'm bringing my service dog with me. How much time do they allow between the wellness exam and the application? I'm not sure what you mean by wellness exam. I assume you mean for the dog. So I believe the rabies shot has to be done at least 21 days before the dog travels to France, and you have to get USDA paperwork. This is one of the things we have videos and a checklist about in Fast Track to France, and that all our clients get access to when they're working with us. Have there been any changes to the admissions process for long-term permanent residency and working visas in recent months? And to your knowledge, are any changes in the works? So I touched on that a little bit in the beginning. All of the changes that we have been observing over the recent months are in the updated edition of Foolproof French Visas. It's mostly minor changes to procedures. It's a little bit of a difference in what the consulate is looking for. They're being a lot more picky right now about the kinds of business plans and things that they approve, for example. And we have, just so you're aware, in every edition of Foolproof French Visas, there's a section right at the beginning where we publish the version information, and there's like a summary of all of the changes that have been made from the last edition. So it's about 2.5 pages of, okay, we went through and we updated French minimum wage in all the different places, and we clarified this section because it was worded in a confusing way, and we revised this section because this procedure has changed, etc. So we go through step by step and identify the changes that we've made since the last edition. Denise, I already have an established LLC. Will I need to incorporate in France, or can I just work remotely without incorporating? You cannot just work remotely without incorporating. You need to have an established business presence in France. Now, whether that means that your US company registers in France as a foreign company that has employees in France, it can sponsor you for a talent passport visa. It can sponsor you for an intercompany transfer visa. You can register as self-employed. You can set up a French company that is or is not a subsidiary or branch office of the US company. There's a lot of different ways to do it based on the income, based on how long you plan to stay in France, based on all kinds of things. So that would be something, it would be better to have for us to have a conversation about your specific business and income and things like that. I need to write a business plan, even though I've had a business for 7 years. Do I have a template that I could use to fill out and complete? Complete French Business Incubator is our program for people who are starting a business in France. All of our clients who are our VIP clients get access to the business incubator, even if I'm the one doing the business plan for them. The business incubator was just revised and updated. I created it about 6 years ago when I started helping people start businesses in France, get the Profession Libérale visa, open companies, etc. It contains all of my knowledge about how to put together a business plan, what the French government is looking for. We have templates for each section, what should be included. It does cover what to do if you already have an existing French company. It does cover their templates for every single section. There are financial projection templates. It covers the 4 self-employment visa types. So Profession Libérale, Profession Artistique, Passport Talent Entrepreneur, and what I call the classic entrepreneur. If you don't have the masters, you're not investing 30,000 euros, etc. And each of those has a different spreadsheet for financial projections. So all of our templates, all of our guidance is in that. You do need to have financial resources when you're moving to France with your own business. And you do need to make sure that there's a clear economic tie to France in order for your visa application to be accepted. Gina, my understanding is that I can stay in France for 90 days with an EU passport. What are the steps for an EU citizen to apply for residency in France? Okay, so you don't have to do anything particular. You can stay in France as long as you like. There are a couple of caveats to that. One is that you need to be exercising your rights as an EU citizen to have freedom of movement. And so what that means is that you are financially supporting yourself. You're not going to be eligible for any financial aid from the French state, and you need to be covered by healthcare insurance. If you're a US citizen who is a dual Italian citizen, but you've never lived and worked in Italy, then you need to have private healthcare because Italy isn't going to cover you while you live in France. That is until you get onto the French healthcare system through working. You can apply for jobs, you can set up a self-employed, you can set up a company, you can work at an IT job, or you can work at McDonald's. It doesn't matter. Nobody is evaluating your income and deciding whether or not you can stay. Like I said, you either have to be covered by private healthcare or you have to be paying into the French system in some way. If you are retired and you're in this situation, it's going to take longer to get onto, you're still eligible for PUMA after 90 days. You're going to have a little bit of a trickier time. You need to show more bills in your name. Typically what they want to see now is energy consumption, so electricity, water, etc., showing that you are actually living in a property where there are bills in your name. And it will take longer because basically after France accepts your file, they're going to send it off to the country where you have nationality, and Italy is going to confirm or deny that you are covered in their healthcare system and that they will or will not cover your healthcare costs while you're living in France as an EU citizen. That can take much longer than just like an American arriving with a visa to be retired in France who can apply for PUMA after 3 months. As an EU citizen, what documents am I required to provide to apply for French citizenship? While the same criteria would apply, you're going to have to generally show that you've been living in France for more than 5 years, that you're financially stable, that you have regular income, that you're integrated into French life, that you speak French, et cetera, et cetera. The minimum language requirement for becoming French is going up to B2 level in probably mid 2025. They said by 2026, the government wants to implement it soon. Eric, in September, I hosted a very informative webinar about US taxes. Someone asked if US credit cards like American Express and Capital One need to be included on the French 3916 declaration of foreign bank accounts. Our guest Melissa said not if they're associated with a declared bank account, et cetera, et cetera. So Melissa was great on the US taxes. She is not, as far as I know, familiar with or able to answer questions about French taxes. My recommendation, and the way we suggest our clients do this, is declare everything. Every bank account, every 401k, every credit card, Stripe, PayPal, etc. account that is not in France needs to be declared. I have created a Notion template, which you mentioned, and I'm going to give you a link to that. So I created a Notion template. It's actually the template that I use to keep track of my own accounts because I have 2 businesses plus personal accounts. Plus I've got like my son's account. So the International Bank Account Tracker is on Gumroad. It allows you to track your bank accounts across different countries. If you're a US citizen living outside the US or with bank accounts outside the US, you need to make an FBAR declaration alongside your tax return if you have more than $10,000 outside of the US at any time during the calendar year. You need to declare all accounts that are not French accounts on your French form 3916. There's a little video with instructions in the template as well for that form. And that applies to any non-French account, not just like non-EU or anything. Like any account that you have that is not a French account needs to be declared with no minimum. And you definitely don't want to not declare your accounts because it can be a 1,500 euro penalty per account. Toby and Blair. If you are in a regulated profession like financial advisor, is it advisable to pursue the auto entreprise route even with the additional requirements for the profession? Yes, I would just advise being very careful in how you word your business plan. And there are definitely people who are financial advisors certified in different countries. So yeah, we just want to be a little bit careful in how we are wording that and making sure that depending on the types of services you're going to offer, that you're going to be able to do them in France and understanding where exactly the limits are. If you're financially independent otherwise, but still want to run a not so profitable business, is there a way to make it work knowing you might struggle to meet the minimum income requirements for the visa, even though you have ample passive income from your investments? Yeah, so here's the thing about the business visas is that self-employment is not really a hobby in the sense that you're either earning enough money to have French minimum wage for the business or you're not. Now, the first, maybe second year, they're likely to be tolerant, especially if you do have that savings or passive income. But the reality is that if you have a visa to be running a business, then you need to be declaring and taxing that income from the business. Especially if you have passive investments, I always like to point this out. It can be more advantageous to be registered as self-employed and to be paying into the system on the basis of your self-employment income rather than paying PUMA, because PUMA is a 6.5% tax on certain types of passive income. Pensions are excluded, but if you have significant investment accounts outside of France or in the US where you have dividends and interest and capital gains and they're not in the context of a tax-free retirement account, then you could potentially be subject to PUMA on passive income over and above around 21,000 euros per person. And so if you are paying into the French system on the basis of your self-employment earnings, then you are not subject to PUMA because you're already paying in. So that's something to consider as well. But as I said, they're looking for you to be making minimum wage, 1,800 euros a month. Depending on what industry you're in, that could be very little work if you're working with US clients. Take that as you will. If I get a 1-year visa initially, is it renewable from within France? And do I become a tax resident? Is it better to start off with 6 months? Do I have to go back to the US to renew? Okay. Typically, anything under 12 months is going to be a temporary visa that is not renewable, and it requires you to go back at the end. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You cannot renew that in France, no matter how much of a mistake it was, no matter how much you beg. Even during COVID, they were not converting these temporary visas into renewable visas. If you get a 12-month visa that is renewable, you become a tax resident when you arrive in France to reside. There are some caveats to that, like if you put your house on the market and it's a primary residence and it sells within your first year, where technically you're residing in France, but those types of things, talk to the accountants, but generally that type of thing would not be taxable in France if it happens within the first few months to 1 year of residing in France. But overall, when you move to France and you have a renewable visa, you're establishing yourself as a tax resident in France. Kristen, if I sell my home in the US and move all of my possessions to my home here, now primary, are the goods items taxed when they enter the country? Do you have any suggestions about how to move and declare the items? Okay, so if your home in France is becoming your primary residence, you have 12 months from your move or from the start date of your visa to import your personal belongings with no import duty. And that applies to things that you do not intend to sell for at least a year or two. I forget exactly what the time frame is that you're not allowed to sell things. These are materials that we have in Fast Track to France that all of our clients get. It's available as a standalone program for preparing and getting ready for your move, doing all of the admin adjacent to your relocation. You need to, after you get the visa, request a certificate of change of residence from your French consulate. If we apply for a residence visa and receive them and then can't make it within the first 3-month timeline to arrive in the country, is it possible to delay for a short period, like a month or less? And how do we do that? When you apply for your visa, you're going to apply no earlier than 90 days before your departure date. So you already want to have your departure date in mind when you make your visa appointment. So let's say I go to the consulate, I'm applying for my visa on November 4th, and I say I'm going to leave for France February 1st, 2025. Okay, and that's probably like 88 days roughly. Starting from February 1st, 2025. So the consulate is going to then issue me a visa that starts on February 1st, 2025. They're not going to give me a visa that starts in December. They're going to give me a visa that starts on the date that I said I'm moving to France. So they give you a visa with a start date of February 1st. You have 90 days from that date to validate your visa and to do a certain number of administrative things upon arrival. So here's the thing. Within those first 90 days, in order to now, so you own a house, right? So you already have the address where we're going to validate your visa. That's not a problem. For somebody who does not have a house or does not have a long-term lease where they intend to reside, they need to spend those 90 days finding long-term housing so that we can validate the visa to that long-term address. Other thing to keep in mind. You are eligible to begin registering for the French healthcare system after 3 months in France. You can send in that application 3 months plus 1 day. However, when you send in the application, what they want is utility bills in your name showing consumption. And they are starting those 3 months not from the first date of your visa, but from the date of your arrival in France. So if your visa starts February 1st, and you don't arrive in France until April 15th, you can't apply for the French healthcare system until July 15th, more or less. You send in that application. You need to start the process to renew your visa between October 1st and December 1st because it needs to be submitted no later than 2 months before your visa expires. We said the visa expires February 1st. Is that enough time to get you on the French healthcare system and have proof that you are covered? In some departments, yes. In others, definitely not. One of the things to consider when determining your timeline of visa application date, visa start date, arrival, travel to France date, finding housing date is is that timeline going to enable you to do the very large number of administrative tasks during that first year? I want to show you for a second, because we've talked a lot about all of these admin tasks that you need to do during the first year. I talked about this during the October call because I was finishing it up. I am very enthusiastic about it. One of the main problems that I see in people who are relocating to France is that even if they get the visa by themselves, they are then not understanding all of the different admin things that need to be set up for the long term of their life in France. So I put together a survey where you can answer. It's about 100 questions, but it doesn't take that long. Okay. It takes about 15 minutes, depending on your visa type. It goes through all of the different admin things that you need to do and helps you identify whether you've done them, whether you knew about them or not, if you had problems, etc., and what the different challenges might be that you are experiencing with your renewal. So this is something that would be best done if you have been in France for 3 months or more. Even if you've been in France longer than a year and you're not sure if you totally figured out taxes or utilities or whatever, that could still be a good thing to do. But once you have completed the questions, we generate a personalized report of what you did good, what you've succeeded at doing, whether or not you need to make any changes to your visa or your admin, what you might have missed, and any referrals that, for things that you need help with. So that's called the French Relocation Admin Success Survey. We call it affectionately the FRAS. And if you are in France and you have questions about whether or not you've done all of the appropriate admin, that would be a really good thing for you to fill out. Okay, you just said if you have a renewable visa, you instantly become a tax resident on arrival. That was not my understanding. We want to be able to spend more than 90 days per 180, multiple years at our French house, but not become a tax resident. Unfortunately, that is not a thing. You would have to reapply for a new visa, a temporary stay visa, and ensure that you spend less than 180 days in France annually for that to happen. If you are not spending more than 180 days in France, you should not have a renewable visa or a carte de séjour. You should not be on the French healthcare system. You should not be exchanging your driver's license. Whether or not you are entitled to own a car in France is a little bit of a trick question. There are various opinions on the topic. You either live in France or you don't. And if you want to have a second home, travel to France frequently, that's fine. But then you need to be applying for the temporary visa each time you're not respecting the 90 out of 180-day rule. Jamie, what's the greatest adjustment besides the language that one makes living in France as an American? So I would think this is a really great question, and I could do a podcast episode on this. I think the main thing I would say is the fact that there are so many things that are very regulated, and you really can't be all loosey-goosey. And we see it especially with people who run businesses in the US, because typically when you run a business in the US, you pay yourself, you pay your expenses, you do whatever, and then you account for it all at the end of the year. Whereas in France, there's very much, you have to anticipate and you have to declare your activity before you start and do certain things to have legal conformity and be running your business properly. And it's a totally different way of thinking about admin. And so it's not just true in business, but that's probably one of the most blatant examples. And that's also, like I said, why I created that survey to get a report on how people actually doing things. Because a lot of people, I see this over and over again on social media. They get the visa, they come to France, and then they kind of do whatever they want. And they never open their French bank account, and they don't sign up for the French healthcare system, and they may or may not exchange their license. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I see comments like, oh, I've been driving in France for 20 years on my New York or Arizona driver's license that isn't valid anymore as a driver's license in France. And I have anxiety on behalf of those people because, like, what are you doing? So you really have to get into that mindset shift of, if I get a visa and I'm relocating to France, my life is in France now. I have to figure out how to do all of the things to shift my life to France. And it doesn't all happen at once. And nobody's coming after you if it takes you 12 days to register your pets with ICAT after arrival instead of 8. But There are deadlines, there are certain things that need to be done. And yeah, at some point, you either live in France or you don't. And if you do live in France, then you need to do French things. Mary, I have a long-standing consulting business, single member LLC with website, letters from clients stating quality of my work, et cetera, et cetera. Do I really need to write a business plan, provide letters from prospective French clients, provide income projections when I'm not starting a new business? Yes, definitely. And it needs to reflect that you understand how your business should be operated in France and show potential for actually having work in France and potential French clients, and that you're legally allowed to do your business in France. Are there resources groups for US government retirees in France? Our benefits and pensions are very different than the other retirees. Probably. There is a very large community of, well, I don't know how large maybe, but obviously there's the State Department employees at the embassy that have their associations and things. That is something where if we were on a call, I may be able to reach out and ask what types of organizations are available. I would look on the US Embassy website. I'm on the board of ARROW, the Association of Americans Resident Overseas. It's a Paris-based organization for Americans who live anywhere outside the US. They do a lot of advocacy for tax and banking. I'm sure that there would potentially be other US government retirees in that organization who may be able to point you in the right direction too. So I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I have some ideas about where you could potentially go to connect. Guidelines for repatriation insurance. My US government retiree health insurance works for the healthcare requirement, but I will need to find by a repatriation rider. I'm not sure that the French consulate would accept that. Usually they don't accept American insurances. Your mileage may vary, but I think that you need to get the same visa policy other people get for the visa application. Okay, I'm not even close to being done with these questions. Stephen, I understand my application must have an address. How do we do the sponsor process for my application? Do you in this process find me my flat? I want to be somewhere in Paris close to the metro. Okay, so we work with people who do apartment searches, and if you fill out our partnership and referral questionnaire, we can put you in touch. We don't do housing searches ourselves, but we work with someone who's really good. As I mentioned at the beginning, typically you want to find a temporary address for 4 to 6 weeks and then spend those first couple weeks in France finding housing quickly. I have to have my own health insurance. What do you recommend? Is there a monthly payment plan? So typically the visa application plans you need to pay in full upfront, and they cannot be canceled once they start. They have to be valid for 1 year in the entire Schengen space, 30,000 euros of coverage, no deductible, include repatriation. We always get our clients 3 different quotes. We get you 3 different quotes. They're the ones that are most commonly used. You make your decision about what's best. Certain ones we get a commission for, others we don't, but we can refer in the referrals form. Cecile, how hard is it to live in Nice, France, if I don't speak French? I don't know. I think that in the beginning you can get by. The longer you're here, the harder it's going to be. There are lots of American and British and English-speaking groups in the Riviera. It would be really easy to isolate yourself into the English-speaking community and not learn French, but please don't, because that's not going to make your stay in France enjoyable in the long term. How hard is it to pass the driver's test in France if I don't speak the language? It is possible to take the written test with an interpreter. They don't necessarily have super frequent testing dates depending on your department. We looked for some for our clients who were in X, and it ended up being more convenient for them to travel to Paris, where the tests were offered more regularly in English. One of our clients ended up, her French, pretty much intermediate. She ended up, like the vocabulary, once you learn it, it's going to be the same vocabulary that comes back like every single time, right? So once you learn the parts of the car, the names of the different the headlights and things like that, once you learn those things, you can potentially take the driving test in French. Not necessarily ideal, but still potentially better than waiting if there's months between testing sessions, if they don't have interpreters available, etc. Jane, for your first year of your visa, can it be inactive while you renovate a property and then change to micro entrepreneur? Jane, I think we met at Cheltenham, didn't we? Yes, and in fact, if you are renovating a property that's going to be a gîte, that's probably what I would recommend. Usually, I do not recommend getting a retirement or visitor visa and then trying to switch to a business visa within the first year. But in this case, that could be a totally legitimate reason to do it like that. And honestly, if you're not going to be making a ton of money during the first year because of the renovation, then it would be detrimental to apply for the business visa initially, because if you're not making money, they're going to look at your year-end results and be like, well, you didn't really run your business. So what are we doing? So yeah, I would recommend in that situation, retirement visa first. You would then, depending on the situation and the timing, perhaps renew as a visitor and then switch, or we could potentially try just directly switching to profession libérale, but it's really going to depend on the situation. If you are on a visitor visa, can you rent a room in your home for 5,000 euros per year? Yes. If you are on a visitor visa, you can have passive rental income. The magic number is 23,000 euros. So under 23,000, it's non-professional furnished rental, LMNP, location meublée non professionnelle. Over 23,000, it's business. Tomorrow, when presenting a birth certificate from the US, do authorities keep a copy for good, or do they just want to see proof of your US citizenship? Okay, in the US, a birth certificate born in the US is proof of US citizenship. In France, a birth certificate is not proof of citizenship of any particular country. Jus solis citizenship is a pretty particular US thing that's in the Constitution and pretty cool. But to answer your question, no, you're typically only giving photocopies, or in many cases now it's scans. You're uploading things to a website and they're not taking the originals. Theoretically, they could ask you to bring the originals to your appointment. They could want to see them, and you're supposed to be able to provide them, but usually they just want scans or copies, and they'll only take scans or copies. Hello, if I buy the property that has a separate studio to rent, do I have to apply for working visa or can I be on a long séjour? So that's the question we just answered. Under 23,000 euros of furnished rental income is non-professional. Small communities with independently owned homes have become popular with retirees. Do they exist in France? Yes. It's kind of hard to say. I would need to know a little bit more about exactly what you mean to answer that question. Karen, what is the best first step? We have a trip planned in the next month or so looking for a residence near Saint-Emilion. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to really consider what visa type or types you might be eligible for. If you're going to be retired, then that's not necessarily a huge decision to make. I would say the next step after that is going to be setting out your timeline, like what date do you want to arrive in France, and then work backwards and forwards from that. Work backwards to preparing your visa application, to getting in touch with us if you want to work with us on your relocation, and then mapping out, okay, if I arrive in France in April 2025, I need to find housing by mid-May to June. So where am I going to be focusing and things like that. Once you have visa appointment, approximate date, and departure for France, approximate date, then you can pretty much figure out the rest of the timeline and the checklist based on those things. And our client materials and our program Fast Track to France go through the whole overview of the things to do to prepare to move. Should we find a property to buy or should we find a rental? Is a rental realistic to find? How do I go about this in the organized and easy way? Okay, so you can do both simultaneously. The thing to know about buying in France is that it can take a long time. It can take up to 3 months between having your offer accepted and signing the final acte de vente on your property. And that's because there's a lot of different players who have like right of refusal to purchasing your property before you do. Like if the town hall wants to buy it, or the local farmer has been grazing his cows on your grass or the previous owner's grass for years, like they might be entitled to purchase it out from under you, things like that. That being said, typically either what we want is we want for the sale to be reasonably far along such that you're going to be able to move right in when you get to France, in which case you can directly put that address on your visa application. Or when the sale is going to go through and you have some kind of temporary housing in the meantime. That can be an Airbnb, hotel, whatever. Or if you're not exactly sure, or you want to really look around and explore an area first, do what I mentioned, get a temporary Airbnb, find a long-term rental in that area and an address where you can get mail, preferably in a furnished place. Furnished apartments, you have a 1 month notice period, no matter where you are in France. So even if you're only there for 6 months out of a 12-month lease, you can still give notice, and it's 1 month notice. You might tick off the landlord a bit because they thought somebody was going to be in there longer, but it's better to have that long-term address where you can get mail, where you can get all your utilities set up. Plan as though you're going to be staying a while you're looking for the perfect place, and then you're not pressured into buying something before you're ready, or if the sale takes longer than you thought, you don't have a lease coming to an end that you need to stress out about. Typically, if the sale isn't completed before you arrive or within the first month or so, work on getting a long-term lease, just like if you weren't planning on buying. Jacqueline, once I move to France as a retiree, will I still have to pay into the US Medicare system? So the thing about Medicare is that Part B can be canceled. If you cancel it and then you want to sign up for Part B again in the future, it'll be subject to a 10% penalty basically for the rest of your life. So you will have to do the math and figure out how likely you are to potentially move back to the US, how likely you want to benefit from Part B in the future, etc. Is it better to plan a move to France in the spring or early to late fall? It seems that July, August, and September could be problematic due to tourism, French vacations, and the rentrée. Yeah, that's typically my advice is I would either advise planning to get there by May at the latest or planning to get there September, October. You mentioned the Loire. It depends a little bit on the region. So if you're going to Annecy, that's the Alps. Like their tourist season is January to March. So that's when it's going to be tricky to find a long-term lease in the Alps. If you're going to Nice, there's no good time. If you're going to Paris, kind of the same. Although August, September are a total nightmare. You do want to think a little bit about where you're going, what type of housing you want to be looking for, and what your budget is, and then potentially plan your timeline a little bit around when would be good to arrive. Allison, just found out through a LifeScan background check for a job I have a misdemeanor criminal charge I thought was sealed from my youth still in my record. I'm now 65. I had to fill out forms to get an exemption for this position. If I don't get this expunged or cleared, will this be a problem for me to get a long stay visa and become an eventual resident of France? No. There are worse people who have become residents of France and gotten a visa. So no, don't worry about that. It was a long time ago. It was a misdemeanor. It is not a big deal. You don't have to provide a criminal background check for most visa application types. The main exception is if you're opening a French company, they want to see you weren't convicted of embezzlement, things like that. But for the most part, they're scanning your fingerprints there. If you don't have some major criminal record, I would not worry about it at all. If you apply for French citizenship, the first 10 years, you do have to provide an FBI background check. I don't even know if something like that would show up on an FBI background check. After 10 years, you don't have to provide a background check. If you are a felon and you want to move to France, either stop being a felon well before moving or wait at least 10 years, don't be a felon in France, and then it'll be okay. But no, for something minor like that, that was so long ago, don't even worry about it. Scott, I have a complex question about how to deal with taxes imposed on the people I wish to leave my home and estate to who live in the US. Who can best give me advice on how to handle this? I'm retired and have a two-year window before I would move to France. So you definitely want to talk to a French notaire and estate planner or tax person. We did do that international estate planning webinar back in the spring with Isaac Bachishat, who is our accountant at Monceau CPA, and Guillaume Eton, who is a notaire with Altemis Notaire. He's actually doing my estate planning stuff. And so I would recommend going to watch that and then getting in contact with them. You can either look up their emails from the webinar, or if you fill out our referral and partnership form, then we can send you an introduction. Krista, if I come to France on a VLSTS with the intention of retiring in France, so I assume you mean visitor visa, how many days per year do I need to be in France to be considered a resident? You need to be spending the majority of your time in France when you're on a renewable visa. What do American retirees who move to France typically do about health insurance for lengthy visits to the US? Do they keep paying for Medicare, find travel medical insurance? I checked out one travel insurance company that wouldn't even underwrite a policy for people aged 70 and over traveling to the US. Yeah, so we recommend getting travel insurance for those trips, but I can't we've used Mondashare for ours. My colleague Kim traveled to the US with her family. She has two adult children and they all got the Mondashare policy. They didn't have to test it, fortunately. So that's one of the things is if you don't know how making a claim is because nothing happens, then on the one hand, that's great. But on the other hand, you don't really know if you can recommend it or not. But we have clients use the Mondashare policies all the time for the French visa applications, and it's fine. Tamara, at what point in preparing is a medical physical needed for retired Americans? That's the Opie visit that comes into play within your first year in France. Robert, we are American citizens living in Portugal under a temporary residence permit. Can we apply from our French visa from Portugal, or must we return to the US to apply? It's funny, we were just talking about all the Americans in Portugal who now want to come to France, and I think that you're making the right decision. You can apply for your French visa at the French consulate in Madrid. So Portugal does not have its own French consulate. So you do have to go to Madrid. You'll deposit your application. They will let you keep your passport. And then when they approve your visa, you have to go back with your passport for them to put the sticker in. Obviously, you're supposed to have your passport even for crossing Schengen borders, so they can't just take your passport and keep it like they would in the US. But absolutely possible. You could also theoretically, if you had a trip planned to the US, you could apply in the US if it's more convenient for you to, I don't know, visit family in Florida and go to the Miami consulate. So as long as you have a residence permit or citizenship in a particular country, you can apply for your visa there. Our most recent visa applicant in Madrid, it was tricky for them to get an appointment in the beginning, but then they got their visa in about a week. Melanie, I recently purchased a property in France, but I'm still living in the US. Utility contracts get confusing. I'm concerned about how to fill out my electric bill. Is reviewing my electric contract and helping me do it correctly part of the service you provide? So that's part of the things that like they're not officially included in our packages, but we can certainly like we answer questions about all kinds of things that are not included, from electricity to looking at somebody's lease to one particularly memorable situation in which somebody was asking me about whether or not having frozen embryos with a French person gave her the right to a visa of some kind. That was a really long time ago, so that was fairly niche, let's say. Yeah, so we answer all kinds of random questions that we can't exactly quantify in our packages for our clients. Drew, can I accept a work position while my visa is expired pending a carte de séjour or a new visa? That's going to be up to the employer if they want to offer you a contract and or allow you to start working when you don't have a valid visa. Technically, they shouldn't and they're not supposed to. In reality, pretty much right now, everybody's visa or carte de séjour is expiring for weeks and or months before the new ones are issued and ready. Things are really breaking down in the renewal pipeline, and that's just a reality of them being understaffed, having lots of applications. It is not at all unusual or people aren't doing anything wrong. Talk to the potential employer. There's two more questions in the chat bucket I'm going to answer, and then I'm going to go home and eat dinner. I have a house in France. I bought the apartment building next door. Do I need a business license to rent the apartments in commercial space or to rent them as Airbnb? So Airbnb, you want to check your local regulations on Airbnb rentals because a lot of places prohibit them or severely restrict them. For furnished rentals, especially long-term furnished rentals, it depends a little bit, but typically business rent is going to be passive. Unfurnished rental is also passive. Furnished rental, typically if it's under 23,000, it's not considered a business. So it would kind of depend on the number of apartments, how you're renting them out. The tax regime for each type of rental is a little bit different. And you'll want to talk to an accountant about the best way to rent out your properties to maximize your tax benefits and deductions. A French citizen friend has offered to sponsor me for a long stay visa. What are the steps to apply for the visa, and can I use her address even though I won't be living with her full time? So you can use her address as like the temporary address for where you'll be staying when you arrive in France, but you want to then find your own address and have a long-term rental situation in your name with bills in your name. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is to get things in your name, have documents in your name like bank statements, utilities, lease, rent receipt, all kinds of things. You want to have them set up and you want to have them in your name. I don't know exactly what you mean by sponsor you for your long stay visa. If you mean financially, then they're going to wonder why this person is sponsoring you. If they suspect you're in a romantic relationship, they're going to be concerned that if you were to break up with this person with no legal tie, then you would be out in the street. That is one fairly common reason that we see people who get rejected for visas. One of the first questions that I ask, if you just mean using her address, then I would say it's your temporary address until you find your long-term lease. And there's a document for that called an attestation d'hébergement. All right, so thank you so much for coming. If you do have follow-up questions, want to discuss your situation in depth, I do offer 1-hour paid consultations that you can schedule with me. I'm going to give you the link to that in the chat now. Foolproof French Visas, the 2024-2025 edition is available as an ebook on our website, as a paperback on Amazon. We also have, if you are already in France, again, I would really recommend doing the French Relocation Admin Success Survey so you can figure out if you have missed anything and make sure that you get all of the important stuff done. Hopefully, I have answered your questions. The next Q&A, which will be the last one of 2024, is going to be on Monday, December 2nd, and same time, same place, and same question submission form. So hopefully I will see you then. Take care. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.